What are the two most important and biggest position battles the Tennessee Titans will have during training camp leading up to the season? We're going to go in depth into these two battles, what they are, who could win, and some inside exclusive information from Justin Melo here. This is the Music City Audible. Let's get to it. Oh, welcome everyone to another episode of the Music City Audible podcast presented by Broadway Sports Media in partnership with 440 Sports. I'm Justin Graver. With me, as always, Justin Melo. And today, Justin, as the Titans hit the field for another round of OTAs, you and I are going to dive into two of the biggest and most important position battles on this roster. I don't know if it's going to come as any surprise what those battles will end up being in our opinion, but we're going to get into it. How you doing today?
I'm doing well, and I'm really excited to talk about these two positions because I don't think it's just me. Maybe it is, but I'm really fascinated about what's going to happen here at right guard and at right tackle. What's already happened at those two positions throughout the early portion of OTAs, and what will probably continue happening throughout the remaining portion and also mandatory mini camp, and then of course training camp, and then the regular season, because I think we're in for a roller coaster at these two positions over these next couple of weeks and months.
Yeah, there you go. You just spoiled the big surprise. The two biggest position groups that we need to talk about here is going to be the battle at right guard and the battle at right tackle. Before we dive too far into it, let's remind everyone, if you're listening, we appreciate it. We would prefer if you watched us on YouTube, where if you are watching on YouTube, make sure to subscribe to the channel, give this video a like, thumbs up, and turn on channel notifications so you get an alert every time we drop a new video. And the best way to help this channel grow is to continue to comment, like and comment on every video, multiple comments. What do you think the biggest position group battles are? Let us know in the comments who's going to win these battles at right guard and right tackle. What do you think? Who should win? Who's going to win? Let us know all that in the comments below as we dive into now these battles at right guard and right tackle. So Justin, I think before we project how these battles are going to play out, first let's talk about why they're the biggest and most important battles. When it comes to the offensive line, we know how important this position group is. We've seen the Titans struggle to field a competent offensive line for a handful of years now. I think you have to go back to Mike Mularkey's time as the head coach to look at a time when the Titans actually had a good, above average to good unit on that offensive line.
What about like Vrabel 2021? Then they still have like Ben Jones and Roger Saffold 2020. I wouldn't say all the way back to Mularkey.
Yeah.
No, they had those two playoff games they won against the Patriots and the Ravens, like Saffold, Jones, they put on a clinic.
That's fair. That's fair. I think maybe back to Taylor Lewan first really starting to show signs of his body wearing down maybe is where we trace this offensive line issue too. But when we look at the line right now, we know your starting left tackle is going to be J.C. Latham. We know your starting left guard is going to be Peter Skoronski. Those are your first-round picks in each of the last two seasons. We know your starting center is going to be big free agent acquisition Lloyd Cushenberry. When it comes to right guard and right tackle, however, we can guess. We can say, well, Daniel Brunskill started a right guard last year, so he's probably the favorite to win that job. We can say that they drafted Nicholas Petit-Frere, and he started as a rookie at right tackle for most of the season, so maybe we can just project him in there. But the Titans have other guys at these positions that could compete. Dylan Radin's a former second-round pick. Sadiq Charles signed in free agency this offseason. Jalen Duncan, last year's sixth-round pick. Like, these guys are all going to compete, as well as a few undrafted free agents. So that's the battle here, and I think all those guys are sort of in the mix for both positions. Like Daniel Brunskill is probably not super in the mix for right tackle. Nicholas Petit-Frere probably not super in the mix for right guard. It wouldn't be the most shocking thing though. Daniel Brunskill has played tackle at times in his career. Petit-Frere may need to kick inside to guard to find his best fit. I'm not saying that I don't think that that's going to happen, but I think all options really are on the table here. All the guys I just mentioned could pretty much wind up at either of these spots. But Justin, based on what we saw in the first mini camp and the first OTA sessions last week, and they're back on the field today. Now, the reporters on the field are not allowed to tell us who is playing at which group, with which group, and what the pecking order is. That's something that is considered inside information that the team protects very closely. So we can't actually report what was going on the practice field. But we do have some insight into who might be leading the way at both right guard and right tackle. What do you know, Justin?
Well, again, I'm going to abide by media rules, even though we're not there. We're not local beat guys, just out of respect for the team. But if you I'm going to do some dot connecting for our viewers and listeners here, because I listened to Robbie and Rex Road the other day. Paul Kuharski, I believe, was filling in for Robbie Stanley. He was, and it was a really good episode. They talked about it. they seem to be alluding that something's going on at right guard, right? If something is going on at right guard, that means it's not Daniel Brunskill, right? Because it wouldn't necessarily be worth discussing if it was just the same guy that started last year. Now, let me be clear. I thought Brunskill gave the Titans league average play last year. I thought he was fine. Wasn't the biggest issue on the O-line. He wasn't a difference maker either, though, right? Like, this is not an above average, outstanding starter that should be coming into camp as an unquestioned starter, right? He should have to earn the job. You look throughout the offseason, they didn't do a lot, right? Sadiq Charles, 1 year, $1.5 million, I believe, was the contract. You've got Dylan Raditz, as you said, a fourth-year guy, finally on the last year of his contract, hasn't met expectations as a second-round pick. That's fair to say, no matter how you slice it. But they didn't draft anyone. They didn't draft a guard. They brought in UDFA. That neither here nor there. That guy's not going to be in the mix, right? But all the hoopla around the right guard position, the media keeps – it's like not insulting anyone, but we're all a bunch of gossip queens, right? Like I feel they keep alluding to something there at right guard, right? And so that insinuates it's not Brunskill. And when you look at Bill Callahan's history of coaching offensive linemen, he seems to prefer bigger-bodied, athletic guys. That's not Daniel Brunskill. He's not the biggest guy in the world. He's not the most athletic guy in the world either, right? I'm going to read you a transcript that was available on polkuharski.com from a few weeks ago. It was very interesting. He published word for word what Bill Callahan said the first time he spoke to the media. Okay, I'm just going to read it word for word. Their first meeting, they asked him about a number of topics. This is what he said when they asked about Sadiq Charles. Okay, word for word. Had a really good career in Washington, I felt, Callahan said. Some of the things I identified on film were positive, could play into our scheme, and could add to what we are doing here. Was a little bit of a no-brainer to acquire him. Think we're going to put him in the best position he can play. We're going to put the best five out there. Who's to say he can't play center as well? We're going to train everyone, cross-train him across the board. Now, I'm going to ignore those final two sentences because he's not going to start at center for the Titans in 2024. That's very obvious. But, and maybe I'm reading too much into it, maybe he watched the film after they signed him. But that specific portion of some of the things I identified on film were positive, could play into our scheme, was a no-brainer to acquire him. That, to me, almost reads like he played a role in the Titans' decision to sign him in free agency. If Bill Callahan went out and hand-selected, what's the word I'm looking for here? Hand-selected, requested that the Titans sign Sadiq Charles in free agency, then I've got alarm bells ringing everywhere here. When I see Titans media members beating around the bush at right guard, not coming out and saying it. But again, no one's talking about what's happening at left tackle because we know it's Jay. No one's talking about what's happening at center because we know it's Lloyd Cushenberry at left guard, right? Like, but they keep talking about something. Rex wrote, I cracked up. He flat out said, what would happen if I just said it? Like, can I just say it? And Paul Kuharski was like, you might get scolded by PR, like whatever. Interesting.
You could have your press pass revoked for, breaking what are the rules of being a media member there. So that
it's got to be pretty hard to get the press. I mean, if Paul Kuharski doesn't have his press pass revoked after all but remember when he got into a shouting match with Kevin Dodd at practice?
He's an antagonistic guy, but he's not breaking rules. It's not against the rules to try to ask Kevin Dodd a question, even in an aggressive, pestering manner. So there's a difference, I think, between being an asshole and straight up breaking the media's team rules. Before we continue, Justin, let's remind everyone that this episode is brought to you by Sinkers Beverages in East Nashville and Bluegrass Beverages in Hendersonville. Sinkers Beverages is the premier wine, spirits, and beer store in the area of East Nashville. Been serving the community since 1985. They have a vast selection. Sinkers can help you with large parties, themed events, or finding something unique for a special occasion. From birthday parties to milestone celebrations to everyday moments, Sinkers can help with the right drink for every occasion. Check out sinkersbeverages.com. And if you go to the Sinkers Beverages website or check the link in this description, you can sign up for the In-Crowd. In-Crowd members get access to allocated wines and spirits, exclusive events, early access to barrel releases, and more. So check out Sinkers Beverages in East Nashville, Bluegrass Beverages in Hendersonville. All right, Justin, I do think it's very interesting that Bill Callahan seemingly led the charge, maybe. I mean, that's a little bit of speculation, but was clearly on board with the acquisition of Sadiq Charles. So is all this sort of what you're saying, trying to get at, that maybe Sadiq Charles is your starting right guard heading into the 2024 season over Daniel Brunskill, over Dylan Radins, over anyone else that may be competing for that spot?
Well, again, to make stuff clear here, I'm speculating and I'm not reporting anything, but I'm dot connecting, and I think I do a good job of dot connecting. I just do. When I pair those comments with sort of the unsaids around the right guard position at OTAs right now, I talked about Callahan's history preferring big linemen. Charles is about what, 6'4", 230? Like, he's a big boy, okay? Brunskill's what? Significantly smaller than that, if I recall. Barely 300 pounds, if I recall correctly. Brunskill's weight. I got the Wikipedia page up. I see it typing with it. They got him at 300. These things are old. I say about because these things are never. They update these things the year they come into the league and never update them again. Right. So who knows what he's at now? But the eye test tells me Brunskill's not 320. He's not 330.
I can tell you what they were.
Charles is.
I can tell you what they were coming out of college. Sadiq Charles' mock draftable profile came out of college at 6'4", 321. Daniel Brunskill, 6'5", an inch taller, 273, 50 pounds lighter. Now, maybe he's up to 300 after spending a few years in the league, but he was, I mean, you can just, from that, you know that, like, they're natural builds, very different humans. Like, Brunskill's had to work to add weight. Sadiq Charles naturally over 320 pounds.
Was a big boy.
Yeah.
And this might be neither here nor there, but it matters a little. Don't forget college teammates with Lloyd Cushenberry on that O-line at LSU. They won a national championship together. He was the starting right guard or left, doesn't matter, left or right guard. Cushenberry was the starting center. It's going to be interesting. And look, we haven't talked a lot about Radins. I think he's going to make an effort. I think he's going to make a push. I don't think he's really in the mix at right tackle. And Titans fans are going to hate that. And our old bet, yada, yada.
I'm not going to hate it at all, baby. Who was right all along? Through 4 different coaching staffs.
Callahan seemed to talk about him being a guard, not a tackle. A guard first player. I hate not sourcing because it happens to me all the time and it pisses me off. But I can't remember what interview that was. But Callahan mentioned him being like seeing him as a guard first type of player than a tackle. So I imagine he's in the mix. But right now, and it's a 3-man battle, and it should be all the way through. Nothing should be set in stone. We're not sitting here saying Sadiq Charles is your starting right guard week 1, Daniel Brunskill, whatever. It's going to be a battle all the way long. If I had to connect some dots, I'd guess Charles is in the early driver's seat. But I don't know who got first-team reps at camp.
Yeah, it's just interesting because, like I said, I think most Titans fans after last season would have just penciled in Daniel Brunskill and say, that's your starting right guard. We already know it because he did it last year. But we do got to acknowledge that there will be a camp competition for this spot. And Sadiq Charles very well may be in the lead at this early point. Who else is in the mix to even play right guard for this team if one of those guys doesn't win it? What's interesting to me is if you look at the Titans depth chart, just like on ESPN or whatever, which is not created by the team at this point. It's way too early for that, so this is sort of just a projection by somebody. But they have Daniel Brunskill listed as the starting right guard, Andrew Rupsich listed as the second-team right guard, who we know he was a UDFA tackle, and Lachavius Simmons listed as the third-string right guard. Meanwhile, Sadiq Charles is listed as the backup left guard, and Cole Spencer, the undrafted free agent out of Texas Tech, is listed as the third-string left guard. Then you have other guys like Dylan Radins, who for some reason is listed as the starting right tackle right now, backed up by Nicholas Petit-Frere, backed up by John Ojukwu, backed up by Brian Dooley. And the other 2 names that we haven't mentioned, Jalen Duncan is listed as the backup left tackle, while Leroy Watson, who the Titans just traded a pick for, is listed as the third-string left tackle. So are you really trading picks for a third-string guy there? I think Leroy Watson's probably higher in the pecking order in terms of the swing tackle equation. And I like the idea that Sadiq Charles is competing for the right guard spot as opposed to being your backup left guard. But are these other guys in the mix at all? Andrew Rupsich, Lachavius Simmons, Cole Spencer. What are your thoughts on those guys?
No, I think it's totally inaccurate. I think it's very clearly a 3-man race at right guard. It's Brunskill, Charles, and Radins. I'd say Rupsich is probably your 4th-string right guard, 2nd-string, 3rd-string left guard, however you want to slice it up. But I don't think he's in contention with those 3 guys to actually start.
He did play some guard last year due to injury,
Did
didn't he? Yeah.
near the end. And he played okay, I thought, towards the end of the season in that spot, although wasn't very good in the preseason. And they cut him coming out of camp, if you recall, but he made
Yeah.
the practice squad. And then they called him up late in the year due to injury. And I thought he played okay. But again, I don't think he's in the mix with those three players to start.
Yeah, I agree. So let's move on and talk about right tackle now, because right guard, it's basically going to come down to one of those three guys. And it's either going to, I mean, sorry to go back to right guard. It is interesting to say that, like, you could name any of those three guys and say, I think this guy's in the pole position right now. And you'd be like, yeah, that makes sense. I would buy Daniel Brunskill as the leader in the clubhouse. I would buy that Sadiq Charles was getting first team reps last week. I would buy that Dylan Radins has the best shot to win the job. And it's going to be close to, and definitely something interesting to monitor there. Right tackle, on the other hand, I just mentioned they traded for Leroy Watson, who was a tackle, played under Bill Callahan in Cleveland. Obviously, they drafted Nicholas Petit-Frere in the second round a few years ago now. He's been third round, excuse me. He's been through some struggles, obviously, with his rookie season, and then a full year suspended after he was, caught gambling on sports, and then came back last year and sort of struggled to really get on the field and make an impact when he was on the field, and then got injured. What do you make? Is Nicholas Petit-Frere the leader in the clubhouse at the right tackle spot? Or are they looking at one of these new acquisitions, or one of these undrafted free agents that's been around? Or is it 6th round pick Jalen Duncan? Like, how does he fit into the equation? Who is in the mix at right tackle? And what do you know about who might be, leading the way at this point?
Well, I don't like saying this because I'm not a big believer in Nicholas Petit-Frere, the player. I'm not really a fan of what he's done for the team. I mean, no one should be a fan of how he's played because he hasn't played well. But I'm going to say this: it's not. I'm not rooting this in opinion based. I feel a bit better for some reason that he's your starting right tackle than I do about Brunskill keeping his job, for example. Not that I necessarily support it, but I just have a feeling he's going to be the starting right tackle. But there have been some interesting developments at camp, and maybe I shouldn't say he's the favorite because he's not been on the field throughout the early portion of OTAs. He's been injured. Brian Callahan's the one that revealed that at the podium when speaking after practice one day, said he is rehabbing a shoulder. If you recall, he suffered a season-ending shoulder injury in like week 8 or 9 against the Steelers, that primetime game.
Yeah.
He had just got back from the suspension, essentially. And he played terribly in that game. I think he gave up a bunch of sacks in like 10 plays and then hurt his shoulder, never came back. I don't know. I don't think we ever got an official diagnosis on what it was. You know how tight-lipped Mike Vrabel is? But that happened in November. The fact that he's still inside the building rehabbing in late May insinuates it was pretty serious, right? Like we're talking about 5-6 months. Now, that's not to say he's not going to be on the field a week from now at mandatory minicamp. I imagine he is back on the field for training camp, and that's what matters here most. He's not going to concede much ground if he's the favorite, if he's only missing OTAs. You know what I mean? So as long as he's back for training camp, he probably remains the leader in the clubhouse. But it is really interesting what was happening at OTAs because he wasn't on the field. We know he was inside the building. Okay, I'm going to break this down officially for you the way it was reported, the right way, the way Titans, would want it reported, so to speak. Jalen Duncan was not spotted by members of media on the field. That's the only info we had gotten because Callahan, outside of Petit-Frere, he declined an opportunity to the difference. Who is here rehabbing that you haven't seen and who's not here because they're skipping it. We didn't know which one Duncan was. I, through independent sources, was able to verify because a lot of Titans fans were like, a sophomore 6th rounder skipping OTAs. He played terrible. What an awful look. He's not skipping OTAs. I can officially report that. He is there present. I'm not going to say anything else, but that seems to indicate he was inside the building rehabbing because if he wasn't on the field and he's there, that's the only other option.
Right.
I'll go a step further and say, hint, hint, if he is rehabbing something, it's something, it would be something very minor. It would not be something that's going to keep him off the field for long stretches of the summer. Okay. So if he's in the building rehabbing, I would guesstimate that it's something minor. It's not something that would keep him off the field for a long time. So, but what's interesting is then who got first team reps at right tackle if it wasn't Petit-Frere, if it wasn't Jalen Duncan? Again, I'm going to do this in a proper manner. Mm-hmm. Robbie and again, that same episode of Robbie and Rex Road where Paul Kuharski filled in, and that same discussion, they were talking about the O-line. Paul Kuharski said the player that got first team reps at right tackle was the one with the most seniority that was available. So we know Petit-Frere wasn't available. We know Jalen Duncan wasn't on the field. We know J.C. Latham is at left tackle. So that insinuates, correct me if I'm wrong, that it would be John Njoku that was getting first team reps at right tackle. Again, I don't know that in an official capacity. I'm playing Paul Kuharski's game of elimination here. The only other options were like Latavius Simmons, who was if you even want to consider him a late season addition last year. He was like on the practice squad, and then they signed him to a reserves contract. He wasn't there before Njoku was, though, because Njoku, remember, was a UDFA last year in camp, and then was on the practice squad for most of the year, and the same thing, got a late season call-up due to injury. And then the seniority thing insinuates it wasn't Leroy Watson who was acquired through trade. Now, if Paul Kuharski...
It depends. Yeah, I guess that's true, because he's only in his second season. This is going to be his second season anyway, so it's not like he's been in the league a long time. Whether it's seniority, like been in the league a while, or seniority, like been with the Titans a while.
Maybe he even said it, but I think he meant like seniority on the team. And that would be a joke. Now, if he didn't say that, I'm glad he said it. If he didn't say that, I would have ventured a guess, and I would have said it here on this show today, that Leroy Watson probably got first team round. I'm telling you, they traded for him, the history with Bill Callahan. I would have guessed that would have made him the first team right tackle. But if I'm playing Kuharski's game correctly, and again, I don't know if I am or I'm not, but if I am, it would have been John Njoku. And that might mean nothing. They're down 2 tackles. I think when Petit-Frere and Duncan are available and healthy, I think it's mostly a 2-man race at right tackle between the two of them, with a guy like Njoku or Leroy Watson having a very small outside shot of getting themselves into that mix. They got a shot because those 2 guys aren't established, the ones that are ahead of them. But I think it's going to be NPF versus Duncan once they're available.
Yeah, and sorry to clarify, Leroy Watson will be entering his 3rd season. So he's been in the league since 2022 as an undrafted free agent. John Njoku has been in the league since 2023 as an undrafted free agent. So if you're talking about seniority, like there is an element where, depending on what you mean by seniority, that Leroy Watson could be that guy. And again, the fact that Bill Callahan, what they did, the way Leroy Watson ended up under Bill Callahan was he was not drafted. He was signed after the 2022 draft with the Atlanta Falcons. He did not make the final roster. A week later, he was picked up by the 49ers. He spent the 2022 season on the 49ers practice squad. He was waived during their final roster cuts in 2023. And a couple days later, He signed on the practice squad for the Niners, and it was in November of last season when the Browns were dealing with injury after injury after injury to their offensive line. If you guys remember how last season went for them, in November, the Browns signed Leroy Watson off of the Niners practice squad. So that means that Bill Callahan and the pro personnel staff in Cleveland were watching the preseason tape of the 49ers. They saw Leroy Watson during that. Maybe they met with him ahead of the 2022 draft, when he went undrafted. So they had a little bit of insight and knowledge on him as a person. They saw the tape from that preseason and they said, we need help. This is the best guy available to help us. We're going to sign him off somebody else's practice squad. He then spent, the next 3 months under Bill Callahan. And Bill Callahan got to Tennessee, and they're looking for depth on the offensive line. One of the first moves they make is to trade for a guy that Bill Callahan picked up midway through the season in 2023. So to me, that signals that he is obviously a fan of Leroy Watson. He must have enjoyed coaching him. He must see some potential and, a higher ceiling there than what these other teams, the Falcons and the Niners, saw to keep him on the practice squad. And now he's going to compete for a spot on the Titans roster. He could end up in the same situation, not make the team, end up on the practice squad, whatever. But I do feel like, given that connection to Bill Callahan, he has a better chance than you would think of competing with the NPFs, with the Jalen Duncans, guys who were drafted, as opposed to being grouped into the John Njoku group and Andrew Rupsich and guys that were undrafted free agents.
And by the way, he started for the Browns in Week 18
right.
for Callahan. I think that was a meaningless game, if I remember correctly. They'd already clinched a wild card spot or whatever, and they had a ton of injuries at tackle. But he played well in that game, in the Week 18 start. So I would have guessed he would have been the guy to get first team right tackle reps without the two front runners available. But again, you're right. He does have a year more seniority in the league, but I'm pretty sure the way PK had framed that was seniority on the team, and that would be a joke.
So those are the four guys basically in the mix for right tackle. Nicholas Petit-Frere, Jalen Duncan, both of those guys working back from an injury, maybe on different timelines, and then John Ojukwu and Leroy Watson. There are other guys that may be in the mix, UDFAs and whoever, but those are the four guys that are really going to probably be competing for the job. And again, same as with the right guard. It's like you could tell me any of those four are the current leader in the clubhouse, and my eyebrows might be raised a little bit at John Ojukwu being ahead of NPF and Duncan, but not that much, just based on what we've seen on the field from them. I do think if I had to guess just who had the best physical profile and played the best on the field, I feel like that was Jalen Duncan to some degree. Obviously, NPF had a decent rookie year, but he still had too many moments where you're like,
I'm sorry, I keep saying, I keep seeing that. Titans fans, I don't know if they're forgiven. I didn't think he had a decent rookie year. I thought he was below average.
Below average, but for a rookie, below average, or below average for a starter in the NFL?
Period. I mean, he was just not good. He just wasn't good as a right tackle in 2022. He wasn't.
Yeah, and when he had a worse year last year than he had in 2022, so that's.
I mean, last year was almost a write-off because he barely played.
I know,
but he was awful when he got on the field.
He
had a lot of weeks off, and then he got hurt right after. But he was awful on the snaps that he did play.
Yeah, and after missing half the season with suspension and then coming back and getting injured almost immediately, it was pretty much a lost year for him. So, yes, he was the biggest draft capital investment, but by a previous GM and a previous head coach, so he has no, he can't stand on that by any means to say that he should be ahead. And then Ojukwu, we heard such good things about him in training camp last year before he got injured that if he came back strong, I could see a world where he is, ahead of the rest, especially if he's the healthy one and NPF and Duncan are not.
I want to be fair. He played bad too when he got on the field. He got on the field towards the end of last year and played poorly. So it's not like we saw a ton of great things out of him either. And Duncan, we know, had some major struggles as well, right? So
he had some good moments. He had some good moments though. But Duncan had some good moments. Yeah, he had some rookie moments, but I also thought he showed some flashes of being, a potential.
He was the best of those three.
Exactly. Which is why, again, it wouldn't surprise me if any of those three were leading the clubhouse right now. And with everything we said about Leroy Watson, wouldn't surprise me if he was the one leading the way. So any of these four guys, I think, could win it. All right, Justin, those are the two biggest position battles on this team. There's a few other positions that are up for grabs. I'm just going to hit on quickly here so that we know sort of what we're watching. And on a future episode, we're going to dive in deeper and look more closely at these battles. But positions like inside linebacker, where they drafted Cedric Gray, they signed Kenneth Murray, they have Otis Reese and Jack Gibbons. Who knows which of the four guys? I mean, obviously you think Kenneth Murray is going to start, but the other three guys, any of them could be the starter, and it wouldn't shock me. You have a huge hole at free safety next to, or I guess whatever safety position Amani Hooker's not playing, whether that's going to be Elijah Molden, whether that's going to be an unnamed veteran that they haven't signed yet. There could be definitely something interesting there. I think who starts along the defensive line is more or less set in stone, but we could probably talk a little bit about that. And then your returner position. Who's going to return kicks? Who's going to return punts? I think there will be a camp battle for that job as well, and maybe preseason will play a role in that. Everything else is pretty much set. I mean, you could argue tight end 1, tight end 2, tight end 3. Mike Herndon has a take brewing where he thinks Josh Wiley is going to end up being the tight end 1 over Chig Okonkwo. I don't know if I buy that yet, but I guess it wouldn't be shocking for that to develop that way. So the tight end battle,
RB2, RB2, Edge 3.
Who's going to be? Is it Pollard or Spears? It seemed like Pollard was getting the work with Levis, while Spears was getting, when they do the quarterback running back drill, Levis was handing off to Pollard, and Mason Rudolph was handing off to Spears. So is Pollard your starter, your 1A, versus Spears being your 1B? Not that I don't know if that one really matters as much, because I think they're both going to play a lot, but that's an interesting one. And yeah, the edge battle, who's going to back up Arden Key and Harold Landry there, be the first rotation guy off the bench. So lots of stuff that we can get into in future weeks here, as we're going to have a long summer to dissect everything. But I think those are the biggest position battles on this team. Any final parting words before we get out of here for this episode, Justin?
No, I'm really excited to chat about those battles. I'm so fascinated by right guard and right tackle. I think we covered it well here, but I'm also very fascinated about inside linebacker, edge, safety, running back, tight end. And look, it's going to be a long summer, right? We know sometimes it's tough to come up with topics, and those are some positions that we should be diving into here over these next couple of weeks. And it's going to make for good content, though. There's really legitimate arguments at all those positions. We're not making up content here, especially like at inside linebacker. You could argue, like you said, another 3-man battle going on there with Reese, Gibbons, and Gray. So some good stuff coming up here.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And speaking of stuff coming up, later this week, Justin and I will be back to do a deep dive into the impact that Bill Callahan could and should have on this team in the 2024 season. How quickly in his past has he been able to turn around bad offensive lines? How quickly has he gotten rookies up to speed playing well? We're going to look into the numbers from Bill Callahan's past 3 stops. So tune in later this week. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel so that you know when that video drops. Make sure you like this video, thumbs up, and turn on channel notifications again so you get an alert when that video drops later this week. So thanks to all of you for tuning in there. And thanks again to our sponsors, Sinkers Beverages in East Nashville and Bluegrass Beverages in Hendersonville. Sinkers Beverages has a ginormous selection of wines and large selection of high-end bourbon, scotches, and whiskeys. A really great place to, if you're looking to stock up on booze in East Nashville, check out Sinkers Beverages. Go to their website or look at the link in this podcast description to join the In-Crowd. In-Crowd members get access to allocated wines and spirits, exclusive events, early access to barrel releases, and more. All right, Justin, that'll do it. Until later this week, talking Bill Callahan. You guys stay safe out there and tighten up.
A Broadway sports media production.